We are here and starting our Education Standards Committee meeting. And on the agenda today, we are finalizing our 2022 work plan. And first want to make sure that everyone has that pulled up. Fraser, do you have a link to it?
I've got it. I printed it out.
Oh, super. Great.
I'm not much of a link guy.
So I want to just dive right in and think through what we can accomplish with this committee this year. A lot of this builds from what President Sutter had done as our committee leader last year. And so let's just go through line by line and make sure we're all on the same page. And Alex, I don't know if you can let me share my screen so that I understand we've got a few folks listening in so that they can follow along as well. Great, thank you. All right. So I am going to just walk through what we have drafted here so far and ask for your feedback along the way. And then we can have a discussion about what's missing and whether or not these are the right priorities for the committee. So here we are. Let's go through first just the admin stuff, making sure that we've got our meetings scheduled properly. I have a preference to keeping these meetings short, doing work outside of the meetings and using these meetings as a time to just check in, report back, prioritize together and make sure we're on track. And so I would recommend and prefer that we change the meeting time from 4:30 to 5 and try to stick to the 5 to 6 timing. Fraser, does that work for you?
Is that, and that'll be on the whatever
The
this
Wednesdays.
is, the
Yep.
fourth Wednesday of the month.
Correct. Yep.
Yep, that's fine.
Great. Liv, does that work for you?
Yeah, that's actually even better.
Perfect. Great. All right. So we're in this process now then of drafting our work plan. And so I just want to, there's nothing here that's going to be a surprise for anybody. There's a few themes that we're inheriting and that we are prioritizing from last year. So first, let's go down actually. So first, social study standards, continuation of what we had been doing last year. And Jessica, actually, if I may pass to you or Alex, just to walk through where we are in this, that would be super.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in briefly. So the new consultant was named to work with OSSI, that's Opportunity Consulting, and they're holding weekly meetings on Tuesday nights with the writing committee. They've got a whole series of intermittent deadlines to get all the revisions finalized and turned into OSSI by March 16th. So that's where you see that date on the calendar there. I think this is row 32 in the social studies section.
Great.
After that, the standards will be publicly released. OSSI has a forum that they're going to use for receiving public comment. And because the draft standards are theirs, they'll really be leading that work and we'll be supporting that, meaning we'll be publicizing that opportunity for public comment. We'll be holding a panel at our April public meeting to invite experts to come in and give comments to the board on that. And just like we are doing right now with the accountability addendum, and just like we did with the EPP regulations, we'll provide written public comment as a board to OSSI on the draft standards as well. And then at some point in the late spring, early summer, OSSI will bring us back a version that we can vote on. The goal is for that to happen at the July public meeting. And then we'll go from there into promoting the new standards, helping to socialize them around the city with LEAs, et cetera. And then OSSI will lead the sort of rollout work for LEAs and supporting them. So I think the bulk of our work really finishes in July. And then after that is mostly an opportunity to be a good partner to OSSI and to make sure that we can socialize these standards and really get them out there, because I think we'll be in the unique position of being a state with some social studies standards that progressive folks can get excited about.
Great.
What is the, okay, then what? I mean, they're done then, right?
Yeah, we're done with them then. Then literally, like, OSSI's going to have to do trainings and supports for LEAs. LEAs are going to have to update their materials and run teacher trainings and make sure their teachers have what they need. The understanding I have is that OSSI will plan for a basically 2-year rollout cycle, so that next school year is everybody get familiar with the standards and plan how to update your courses. And then school year 23-24 is the new standards are in place.
What about the curriculum?
Well, that's it. That 2020.
So you're talking about the standards, but what I'm looking at it as an English teacher who wasn't really excited about the way that the curriculum came out after the standards were dropped.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know when English, it must be 10 years now.
Oh yeah, because that's the Common Core.
Yeah. And, but so the curriculum, are they going to come with, how does that curriculum work as far as the other LEAs besides DCPS?
So there's what it is now and what I hope it'll be. And I don't want to take too much time out of this meeting, but I'll say what it is now is that DCPS writes its own curriculum and every charter LEA writes its own curriculum.
Okay.
I think the hope with the social studies standards is that there might be an opportunity for cross LEA curriculum writing, because so many of the teachers from so many of the LEAs were involved in the writing of the standards.
Is that an aspirational kind of an idea, or I mean, is there any weight behind that with OSSI and with the deputy mayor?
So I think OSSI is very excited about it. I know the teachers from the LEAs who've been working on writing it are excited about it because they've been working together for a year and a half now,
Right.
And would like to work together. I think the question is getting money for that, to give time for teachers to write curricular units together. And in some ways getting DCPS to be open to writing collectively and collaboratively. I don't think they're opposed to it. I think it's just hard to get anyone to get out of their silo and start to work across if they're used to controlling everything inside one place.
We live in Washington, D.C., not in Iowa. So they need to know how to get out of their silos. Thank you for using that metaphor.
Thanks for the time, Representative Chang.
Thanks.
That was very helpful.
President Sutter. So is there anything that you need from the rest of the committee before our next meeting?
I don't think so. I think that we are expected to have an update from OSSI as we approach that March 16th deadline. We're also expected to have a conversation with the deputy mayor's office, we being leadership, about the release of the standards, so that everybody's comms teams are basically at the ready to understand that we're likely to draw some national press attention when our draft standards are released. And we want to make sure that folks feel like they're playing offense, not defense.
Got it. Hey, Ruth. You're on mute.
Sorry for being late. I couldn't get on. Is this a good time for a question?
Yes, please.
So I'm sorry I missed this. You probably already said it, but do I understand this to mean that a draft comes to the board on March 16th and then it goes public on April 1?
The draft goes to OSSI on March 16th. So Opportunity Consulting is working with the writing team that OSSI pulled together, the OSSI TWC, and their deadline for getting a draft to OSSI is March 16th. OSSI has promised that the standards will be out for public comment by the end of March. So we've put April 1st there as a placeholder date, but if they're keeping to their own timeline, it'll be March 31st at the latest.
So
I do not understand that we're getting a draft before it goes public. I think that the public draft is our chance to review them as well.
So given that people are very concerned about, I mean, it sounds like part of the comm strategy is to push back on concerns, if I'm reading that right. I'm just concerned that, I'm a little concerned that we don't have one more look at it before it goes public. And I have raised previously, and maybe you know, may know more about this, President Sutter, is whether some historians have really looked over it, that we can sort of say that and know that.
I think, I shared your request that OSSI have other folks take a look at it before it goes public. I think my understanding from them is that there's a timeline we've asked them to keep to. In order to keep to that timeline, some things have to be foregone. They feel like the public has waited a long time for these standards and they'd like to get them into the public eye. I would also be careful that I didn't intend to, and I hope I didn't characterize the comm strategy as pushing back against concerns. I think it's recognizing that there's a national narrative happening around how we teach American history that is different than the predominant narrative within the District of Columbia. We don't anticipate a lot of pushback from local folks about our standards. We do expect that folks outside of the District of Columbia may try to use our standards as an opportunity to highlight their own agendas, their own concerns about the teaching of American history, the teaching of world events, history, etc. And we want to make sure that we can disentangle what the residents of the District of Columbia want our students to learn and know and be able to do versus what outside voices may want to say about our standards.
Can I ask a question just through Ruth, I guess? Because I know that we talk to people outside of DC, all over the country, and people are always asking me about, well, do you have these school board meetings when people come in and start doing this and doing that? And I say, thank God we don't have that kind. And I just to echo what you're saying, Jessica, is that I can't imagine that kind of a conversation at our meetings. Ruth, what do you think?
Well, my concern, so the first draft of standards had some very serious issues, and my understanding is that a lot of them have been resolved, all of them have been resolved, I don't know. I've personally not really spent any time with the secondary ones, so I don't know. I only spent time with the early grade ones. And what I do think is that it's important to people. I think everybody's right. People in DC want a certain kind of standards. That's not necessarily what they want in other places, but I think people everywhere want to know that the standards, are respected by respectable historians, right? I mean, historians span a range of views and so on, but I think that's important. And I worry about that. And I just think it, again, I haven't seen them, so I don't know, but I would feel a lot better if we know that folks who are very aware of sort of the debates going on this and are very familiar with history have really looked at them and are able to sign off on them and say, yeah, that's great.
Thanks, Representative Wattenberg. And I appreciate this discussion. I do want to zoom out and remind folks that what we're doing right now is working through our work plan. So Representative O'Leary and Representative Wattenberg, are you recommending that we add a line to this work plan?
I think it would, whether it's before or after we see it, I think having historians review it is very important.
So what is our role as a committee in trying to make that happen? Like, what is the actionable step for us to take on?
Well, I know that one thing that is being planned is to have a panel on it, but maybe we could also pull together a list of historians, and if OSSI is not going to do it, that we could, send review copies out to a group of historians and get comments on it.
And could we do that between this March 16? Because I see two things there, right? One is either we ask for them to delay this to do that, which I do not think is and I don't think that necessarily makes the most sense. Or is it we host a panel to review it with reputable historians between the 16th and the 1st.
Well, so far, we're not sure we're going to see it on the 16th, if I'm correct. So I would agree with what you're saying, Alistair, but I think that, yes,
Okay.
if that, I mean, if that was possible, I
I'm
think that
not
would be good.
sure, Alex, I somehow ended up on the view only screen and I don't want to hop off.
Okay.
Would you mind adding a line after row 33
Yep.
around a panel with experts for review? And we're not sure where that will fit in terms of the timeline, but after we've received it.
Yeah. That was my mistake. That actually should have been on here and I may have deleted it by accident.
Does that get to your concern?
Well,
Or actually, is that different? So Ruth, is that different than what's on line 35?
well, I guess what I'm getting at is I think it would be useful to have some ability to have an internal review and potentially have some historians review it in advance before it goes public. That would be my,
And I think I get that actually, Representative Wantenberg. What I'm not sure about is how what do we do to make that actionable?
well,
And-
it means talking to Ossie about it.
Okay.
And
Can I just ask one
it sounds
clarifying
like
question?
Representative Sutter does not think that's viable.
Well, I am happy to bring it to Aussie, full stop. I think my question is, if we put this out to a panel of historians, there's a couple of things that have to happen. We have to identify the historians, we have to secure their interest and willingness to do it. We have to make sure they can do it on a quick time turnaround without compensation. And we have to decide what we do with their feedback. Do we want to include their feedback in the public comment process, or are we asking that if they have edits, that we also want to ask Aussie to make those edits before the standards go public? And that is my hesitation, because the standards have been drafted by a writing committee of educators and university professionals. And I wonder what that will look like if we say the state board chose 5 historians, the historians have the following feedback, the state board requests that these changes be made from what the educators and university folks wrote, whether we can secure that agreement from Aussie, and what we'll do with their feedback if Aussie does not want to include it before the public comment period.
I mean, to me, when I've been involved in standards efforts before, you would get those kind of comments. Nobody would, the group responsible, whether it's a group at Aussie or the board or both, wouldn't say, here's every single comment that the historian made, please go make them. But rather the group, us as a committee working with Aussie, however we did it, would go through them and acknowledge that some seemed very important and some didn't, and some seemed that they needed to be made. And that's what would get passed on to the committee.
Yeah. So I'm thinking back, Representative Wattenberg, to the ethnic studies panel that we hosted with the writing committee. As let's bring some of these experts in to help inform and share insight into what both the latest research and help answer some of the panelists' questions. And by panelists, sorry, I mean the writing committee's questions. As part of that chapter of time that we had to provide that kind of guidance. And so I think, again, just all I'm thinking about right now is what needs to go into this work plan. So what I hear from you, if this is right, Representative Wattenberg, is more of an ask to our leadership from the board in their next conversation with Aussie to raise this as some, make an ask of whether or not we could see it in advance. Is that correct?
I think so, or alternatively, it could just come to us and then we could send it out to a group of historians.
So
I just feel like before we as a board vote on it, we need that, so.
Alex, and just make an, let me think about the wording here, but I think it's, DC SBOE leadership ask for an earlier draft, right? Ask for a draft before the final release. And
or do the review after we get it. I mean, I'm not trying to be difficult. I do think that we need to have that review. Often
And-
it's nice to have that before it's public. It doesn't matter to me. I just think it's important to have it. And that the board.
I
is
understand
meeting
that,
at some
Representative
point.
Wattenberg. I understand that, and I think it, you know, it would be, I don't think that's in, you know, in our, I mean, we can ask for that, right, President Sutter, but I think it's, we'll see what they say. Is there anything else that folks want to add?
So then if they don't,
That's-
Alistair, then can we, we can send it out to historians. So we should do what we should do to do that, put together a list.
Yeah, and Representative Wattenberg, that's one thing that previously we actually had already discussed. And I think President Sutter and I had started pulling together a list of folks that regardless of if it's just the final standards or if it's an early release of the final standards that we get to send out, we definitely have a list going of folks that we're hoping to make sure comment on this. I will also say that I spoke with Sally at Globalized DC, and she herself and their organization, she has already said that she plans to be doing a lot of outreach related to our standards too, with some of the groups that she is connected with. So I do imagine that some of this feedback that you're suggesting, Representative Wattenberg, is definitely going to happen, but whether or not it happens before the actual public release or it's just part of the larger public comments, I think is, you know, to be determined.
All right, I would like to move on to the next theme, which is literacy standards. And what we've done so far, thank you, Alex, for taking lead on this, is adding the structured literacy and science of reading to our public comment letter. And I'm really encouraged that Empower Ed included this ask in their budget letter as well. And you know, I think a big piece of this work has been right to date informed by the conversations that we've had with educators, with families, and particularly with reading instructors, right, on what we need to invest in as a city. So my update for you on this is that we've had the literacy committee that Representative Wattenberg at least has hopped in on before. We had our last and final meeting on last Wednesday, and have our revised vision and recommendations drafted that I would love your feedback on. And what
Do we have that?
I have sent that to you, and I'll send it after this as well. So would appreciate your feedback on that before our next meeting. And in the meantime, I'll be working to coordinate with Aussie on how we can actually take that and move it forward. My current hypothesis is that we continue this work with our colleagues at DCPS and Public Charter School Board and Aussie and Washington Teachers Union and many of the literacy stakeholders that we've pulled into this conversation to develop more of an action plan with commitments that goes alongside the comprehensive literacy plan. So in my mind, right, and a lot of this is going to hinge on how the conversation with Aussie goes, and I do think that this is an ask, President Sutter, if you're still there, that I have for you and leadership around
Here.
your next conversations with Aussie as well, to make sure that we can keep moving this piece of the work forward. And so these lines 24 to 25 to 27 are quite vague, and I think hinge on how these conversations in 22 to 24 go.
Alistair, can you tell me the date when you sent that?
I will. I'll resend it to you. I just don't want to block my screen, Representative O'Leary, while I'm sharing it.
Okay.
So Representative Chang, absolutely. Vice President Thompson and I will add this to our agenda for our next meeting with Aussie. please let me know if there are talking points or key points you want to make sure that we hit around the work plan and next steps. But we did use our first meeting to let Superintendent Grant know that this was coming.
Super, thank you. Anything I'm missing in this bucket that you think needs to be an action step?
I just have a question, which is
Yeah.
there a place in there? Are you planning that there's going to be a time that we're going to talk about this level of plan? Or this is, at this point, we should just do this by email and more discussion is down the line?
Yeah, so I think right now, I mean, I think a lot of this hinges on how our leadership and has their next conversation with OSCE, and then also how I've been talking with folks who work on the literacy side of within the OSCE team, right? So coordinating with them and thinking through what might go into this action plan, and then I think this is where a lot of the work for this committee will be, that I would love your feedback on, and your help to get feedback from families, from educators, right, to make sure that we are doing that piece right. So if that's your question, Representative Wattenberg, I think let's save this part of the conversation for later.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, and then I have this is also a legacy of last year's work plan, which is to establish a state process for review. And Alex, I'm going to ask you to just give an update on what you and the team have in progress, and then I want to raise an idea for how we move this forward.
Sure. So let me first open up a document on my screen and share it with you all.
Great.
If you give me a second. It is not a Google Doc, but you guys all should have the Word version. But let me open it anyways. Excuse me.
And Representative O'Leary, I'm going to send you a link
Yep.
to.
Please send it to me on any of my emails, because I'm.
Will do.
All right, let's see here.
Thank you.
All right, so if you all recall from the last meeting, at least the folks that were part of the Ed Standards Committee last time, so Representative O'Leary and Representative Burnstead, try to bring you up to speed quickly. But some staff, we've been doing some research on how other states have either codified a process around academic standards revisions, whether it's been legislatively or through kind of a formal board policy. And so one of our policy fellows, Giselle Miranda, has been leading this work, and she's unfortunate. Well, she's not unfortunately, but she's driving cross country right now. And so she's unable to join this meeting, but she has been helping us understand what other states do. And so background, some states might say, every 6 years, we are going to review our standards or update our standards, or, out of all 10 standards we have, we're going to divide them into thirds and review them in batches of 3 every 7 years. And so there's a wide range of how standards are reviewed across different states. And Giselle put together a great memo on that for the last meeting that she shared, and I'll make sure to get that out to you all. Some work that has happened more recently is some of the committee members had some additional follow-up questions, clarifying questions related to what do review processes look like? Are there vision statements that are involved? How are things done in tandem with other, assessments and things like that? And so this memo in itself, and we won't go through it all now, but it's been shared with you, has answers to those questions. And so a couple of things that I just wanted to share with you all is we are actively trying to understand what other states are doing related to standards revisions, how we can make sure that a process is put in place in the District of Columbia, whether formally, legislatively, or however, And that's what we're working on right now. Some things that I think are really important to note that I've recently learned, and I think this was something that Representative Parker raised at the last meeting, was this idea of kind of vision statements or guiding principles going into the review of any academic standards. And so I think that both Colorado and Tennessee have kind of these guiding principles, key insights that really ground any standards revisions. And so I think that's something that we'll want to think about when we're doing any formalization of this process. And then the other thing that I did just want to note as well was, I think, a question that Representative Wattenberg had raised, which I think is really valid, is around, when we talk about standards review processes, are people typically doing, modest reviews? Are they doing total rewrites? And it does seem that most states will go into it with a full review in mind, whether or not that actually means that a total rewrite happens. But if you're going to say, I'm going to review the social studies standards, it oftentimes is, okay, we're going to pause, we're going to review everything, and then we're going to make a decision at that time as to whether or not a total rewrite happens. But it does appear that most states are, on these, whatever the increments are, going in with the mindset for a full review. But again, whether or not it's a total rewrite, like what we're doing right now with our social studies ones, is, I think, another question. But a lot of information in this memo. I'm not going to spend time going over all the details, but I will stop sharing my screen. I will see if folks have any questions about that, and I will punt back to Alistair, kind of talk about the other pieces. But I think by and large, I think a large hope would be, after we've gone through the process with our social studies standards, we do kind of an after action plan, really review and pull apart like what worked, what didn't work, and try to figure out, is there a process that we as the state board can put together, because we know that other standards will eventually need to be reviewed, revised, et cetera, over the years ahead.
I have a question. I guess it's OSSE. Does OSSE have a template for each standard, each subject standard? So is the social studies standard that we'll be voting on this year going to be under the same template as the English standards were 10 years ago, or that the literacy standards, I don't know, what are the next standards that are supposed to be acted on?
That's actually the question that we are looking into, Representative O'Leary, right? So I encourage you to think one layer up in terms of, right, I think for us, it's thinking about the question that I think we're answering actually is, when and how is it decided which standard gets updated next, and how is that standard to be updated?
So that hasn't been
correctly, Alex?
That's not been done, right?
Correct. That has not been done. And so I think it's our hope that, as Representative Chang said, that we can get to a place where we either outline, like, this is a timeline that we want to follow, like this is the order of standards, or, but yeah, there's nothing like that. It's all done ad hoc right now.
Thank you. That's the answer I didn't want to hear, but I expected.
And because of that, right, and I want to flag that in our last meetings, the feedback that we've gotten from our student representatives and the importance of student voice in this process has really become very clear for me, particularly in deciding when and how these standards get updated, right? So that layer of analysis, I find it really important to make sure that we have both the voices of educators and the voices of our students and actual students in thinking that piece through. And I would like to propose that LEAVE actually helps us take lead on a big chunk of this process, right? And in that way, make sure that we are doing this work in very, very close collaboration with the Student Advisory Committee in deciding that question that I just posed, actually, Representative O'Leary, which is how do we actually determine when, how, and then pull in student voice in at the actual process that we propose for how standards get revised. And so Leave, if you're open to considering working with Alex and the DCSBOE staff, who, as you saw, already are very knowledgeable about what other states are doing, where we are in all this, and helping to make sure that as we move this work plan forward, we put student voice at the forefront. Would love if you'd consider taking that on, and to the other members of this committee, if you would support having Leave be our lead in this.
Yeah, I'm more than not only open to it, but ecstatic about the possibility. Obviously, I have a lot of ideas and opinions. So yeah, I'm more than open to it.
Super. That would be super. Yep. And so, I think where we could start with that, Leave. So starting you off also as part of this, educating all of us, right, is in this line, row 12. So Alex, could I get your help to work with Leave to convene this panel from other jurisdictions and think through sort of, okay, and really, Leave, I'd love to do this panel with the Student Advisory Committee, right? And folks from the Student Advisory Committee who could join as well. Get questions from students for experts from other jurisdictions about how do other states and how do they decide when and how things get revised, right? And so Alex, does that work for you?
Yeah, that works for me. And just a point of clarification. So with this panel, are we suggesting that, as you said, it would be something for the Student Advisory Committee? Would it be something for the Ed Standards Committee? Is this something for the larger board at a public meeting? Is it completely separate, like when we did the Ethnic Studies panel? What are you envisioning?
I'd like to propose that it stays within the Ed Standards Committee timing, if folks are good with that.
Yep.
That was what my question was.
Great.
Because we've had really exciting work with panels in our committee for teacher educator practice.
Right.
And then we can inform the board with that information as a next step.
Great. So my proposal would be that Alex and Leave work together to choose one of the next Wednesdays that we have this meeting and think about who we can bring in, and in that timeline, right? I think part of this work stream would be each of us on the committee start to talk to the educators and school leaders and families we know to make sure that we're getting questions in advance that we can then ask these panelists, and lean heavily on you to get questions from other students.
Can I make a suggestion that you make it an hour and a half?
Yeah. I'm open to that, absolutely. So for that meeting, let's push it back to then a 4:30 start time, if folks are okay with that, but keep our regular meetings 5 to 6.
Oh, I thought our 4:30 was our start time anyway.
I started our meeting by proposing that we move it back for future meetings.
I thought you said you were moving it for over half an hour. I must have misunderstood you completely. I thought that's why Leave was so happy.
All right, great. So
let me ask one question though.
Please.
I mean, this is all about setting up literacy standards, which I'm all for, right?
No, actually, this is not. This is a question with other state leaders about how they decide when and which standard to revise.
Oh, so it has nothing to do with what we're talking. Okay, good.
Nope, it's a different bucket. Yep.
Gotcha.
So in summary, right, our committee is going to take on 3 buckets of work this year. And I'll just share my screen one more time. So we would have our social studies standards work, which President Sutter and Alex had been and will continue leading. We have our literacy standards work, which I will take lead on. And we have this broader question of just what is a process for us to review that Leave will take lead on.
Okay, great.
Okay. Super. Representative Weinberg.
So let me see if I understand the discussion about what our process is. That's folded into what Leave is doing.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
That's, and we'll all participate in that. Leave.
Absolutely. Right. I mean,
Go Leave.
I agree. Yeah. Thanks, Leave. Thanks for taking this on, and really, really excited to, and honestly, be probably the only jurisdiction that is putting student voice at the forefront of how this is decided. So I'm really excited to see how that what ideas students put forward and how we do this right, because it affects you most directly.
Yes, and thank you so much for everyone for entrusting me with this. And I'm super excited to get to work.
Great.
One thing that I'd like to mention to Leave is, I remember when Alistair came on the board a year ago, and the new members of the board were kind of hesitant because they felt they were rookies. Your rookiness disappears after the first meeting, period. So we're not considering you as anything else than a full member of the board.
Okay, I'm glad because it's been a long 2 months.
Oh, this is great.
That's both an honor and a responsibility, Leave, is how I hear that. All right, so, and I want to, since we're on a topic that around you, Leave, I want to bring up one more thing that you raised in our working session, which concerns the resolution that we put forward around LGBTQ and other equity-focused standards, and how we actually follow through to make sure that those have follow through from OSCE and from LEAs. And I'm seeing you raise your hand, actually, Leave. Is that
Yeah,
right?
I could just make like a point of clarification of what I was talking about
Yeah.
specifically. So what I was saying, well, first of all, I love SR 21-7 for so many reasons. But the context, this is I co-created with a group of students and co-led with a group of students a mandatory professional development for all staff at our schools, teachers, administrators, literally everyone, about how to create safe spaces in schools. And it's annual, so this isn't the first time we've hosted it. And I think, and the reason I brought this up in the working session is because I think that the resolution gives a great starting off point, but I would love to see if not only do we ask students about the effectiveness of professional developments 2 years, I believe it was 2 years, I haven't seen the resolution in a few weeks, but 2 years after it happens, but invite them into the process of creating the professional development, because every school is so different in the challenges that queer students face within that school, that they might be able to give some insight on what is really important for the professional development to address. And then the other thing that I was thinking about, which is and I can share this with the committee after a report of the professional development and what kind of data we gathered, but we gathered a lot of data from teachers to see how they thought the professional development was effective. And what a lot of them said was that it was engaging, which was good because they're used to just sitting through meetings. And I think that if we want to, have follow through, it needs to be engaging with those who are like in the professional development. So that they don't just, because teachers and staff members have a lot of things, they don't just want to be listening, they want to be like taking it in.
Leave, you're lucky in that you don't have to sit through what is called professional development, and is so far from developing anyone professionally. I had 47 years of faculty and professional development, and I could probably tell you that maybe 2 or 3 hours in all that time were valuable to me. So that's something we need to push. We can't even localize it to everything that the social studies standards the new social studies standards talk about is what we should focus on. I mean, if you think of anything about race, about gender, about sex, about all kinds of anything, which students need to know about, but adults need to know about even more. And they're in that silo. We need to blow the silos up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think I forgot to say what all that was adding up to is that I think that another thing that would be effective in outreach is not only asking students to take surveys 2 years after to see how it has changed school culture, but to also have teachers take surveys directly after professional developments to see if they thought the professional development was engaging and like brought new information to the table. Because while there are some new teachers, if veteran teachers like that have been at a school for a long time are receiving the same professional development over and over again or in the same ways, it might not be as effective. So I think that surveying teachers would also be a good way to make sure that that outreach happens.
Okay, the problem with that is they do a survey after every professional development. Right, and I would assume that they go into a large receptacle because nobody reacts to it. We never hear anything about what.
And I think this actually, President Sutter is a broader question around how we, I think for the leadership around how do we follow up on our resolutions and ceremonial resolutions. And to me, it also fits into this broader bucket that Leave, you're already agreeing to take lead on, which is what is the process through which we actually keep student voice a part of the standards conversations, right? And how do we create dynamic feedback loops with students, with educators, with families to make sure that our standards continue to be reflective of what our students want to and need to learn, right? And so President Sutter, if I may, I think this is the one that I have the hardest time thinking of actionable steps to take on to accomplish that vision. And I'm wondering if anything, well, first comes to mind for you from the leadership side.
Yeah, I mean, two things come to mind. So one is that we have this chance with the social studies standards to pilot any idea that we've got. So I think we should design something as a pilot and use the social studies standards as the first go round for it. So on the LGBTQ plus issue, for instance, like we could pilot the kind of survey we'd want to throw to teachers, we'd want to throw to students, and use that as a pilot on any of the rollout professional development OSSE does after the standards are voted on by the board. So presumably they'll stand up something to start this summer. We could pilot that with teacher PD following from there. I think it would be wonderful too if it could be done in conjunction with OSSE to say the state board has these questions that will help us identify if we've kept to our resolutions. We're asking that OSSE help us on delivering this to teachers following PD and sharing back data with us. Like, I think that's one thing that comes to mind. The second is thinking about asking LEAs to include set questions about our things in any survey work they do following up on professional development. So it could be something that we share with LEAs, even if we don't get 100% uptake. If we can get DCPS to share it in social studies PD follow-ups, if we could get KIP and Friendship to do it, and if we could get 2 or 3 other LEAs to do that, we would get an interesting sample to at least be able to sort of spot check this. So that's my first thought. The second thought, though, is that I think it's a bigger question to say, how do we use this as an opportunity to develop ongoing collaborative relationships with both OSSE and with the LEAs, that we're doing this as a means of understanding the impact of our work. We don't have any authority over either of you. So this isn't a judgment on your part. It's a, how is our work being implemented, or how do we have to revisit our own work? So that's the second thing, is how do we use that pilot to then take ourselves up a level and say, how do we build this as an ongoing fashion?
Leave, does that clarify for you at least? I mean, this is a lot, I think I think these items already are going to be a lot for the committee to take on. And I think my question to you would be, does folding the questions you're raising into either what social study standards revisions are doing already, or what we're thinking about doing with this revision of the broader process. Answer the question that you're raising around SR 21-7? Or do you think it's a separate work stream?
I think so. I think it answers the question. Sorry, I should have been clear. I think that anything that I'm highlighting over SR 21-7 could be addressed in like a 2-line amendment or something to SR 21-7 that just says like include students in planning process, survey teachers, and look for qualitative data. Again, I will send out email with it's not technically informal, but it's kind of informal
Okay,
results that we have gotten about that separately, but that also might be a conversation that's not for the Education Standards Committee, and that is more for the state board as a whole about outreach.
great. And actually, I feel like that's a great first step, right? If we have a panel and then we have a, student advisory committee puts out a resolution that the board then signs on to that explains how student voice can be dynamically incorporated into these processes generally, right? I think that if I'm understanding what you're raising around SR 27-7 correctly, I think that gets to, right, it's not just about that one issue, right? It's about all standards.
Yes, it's about
Okay.
how we follow up with ensuring
Right.
that students are not only on the like receiving end of how effective things are, but like especially in professional developments, that
Yes.
there is some place, even if students aren't developing the professional develop or aren't assisting to like host professional developments, that they're at least there is an option for them for their schools to be somewhere in the process of like voicing what they think needs to be addressed in those professional developments.
And I would go so far as to say then that for the panel, Alex, if we could specifically try to find an expert somewhere who might have a sense of how student voice is incorporated anywhere else in the revision of standards.
I think we have schools in the city that incorporate student voice.
That's not standards, right? Representative O'Leary,
Yeah,
that's curriculum.
Yeah, I'm just saying that if you wanted to hear from someone who understands how to do that,
Yeah,
that there are people that there are schools that work and there are schools that don't. And the schools that work probably incorporate student voice more than some schools which don't incorporate. The teachers never hear a student talk outside of the classroom.
I'm seeing another raised hand. Am I missing someone? I think it's the DC SBOE account. Am I missing you for anything?
Yeah, it's just a clarifying question.
Sure.
Alistair. Do you have an idea of when you would want this panel to occur for the committee?
I will leave that to you and leave to decide
Okay.
what the capacity is.
Okay.
And we'll work their other items around that.
Okay, perfect.
And then I actually have one question, just because just a clarifying question about like technical stuff. So the work that we're talking about for the review and revisions of how like we select, or the process for review and revisions of standards. So we as a committee will draft, or like there will be a draft of what these standards should be. We vote on it as a committee, then it goes to the state board. The state board votes on it as a board. Is that
Is that
correct?
correct, President Sutter?
To me one more time.
Yeah. So I mean, I might be way off base. I'm not sure, because this is my first committee meeting.
You're doing a great job at it.
Thank you. So there is a set of standards that is drafted around the way we process of review and revision of standards. That set of standards is then voted on by the committee, which is then voted on by the state board. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is what I think is the way we would do it. The fun thing that you're walking into, Leave, is that DC doesn't have any sort of rules and regulations around how we do standards. So we're making it up. And we're using the model of what we made up for the social studies standards, which we took from other states, as the framework for this. But I think what you just proposed is definitely what we have talked about, and I think would be most appropriate. Some sort of set of steps and processes would be voted on in committee, and then by the full board.
So does that mean that there is a chance for not only public comment at like the, obviously, or from comment from the panel, but there's also a chance for public comment from those who want to at a state board public session?
It's a great question. I certainly think there should be. I think we should share this with the public to say,
Yeah.
here's what we're proposing. We'd love insights and feedback on this before we take that vote for sure.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
And because we don't have a process for this that's set, leave, I mean, this is what I get really excited about. We'll be here to support you along the way, but if we can develop that process with student voice at the forefront, I think we're going to do something different and right. So
100%.
I find that really exciting and really appreciate that you're taking that on. So I want to zoom back to, we've got 30 minutes left for this meeting. I want to zoom back to our work plan, and my sense is we're at max capacity for this year. If we get all of these things done, I will see our committee as having done a successful, great job. And so one, if you disagree, you think we should take, is this too much? Do you think we need to take some things out? Is it too little? In which case, who's got more time to commit to help move things forward? But Representative Wattenberg.
So this isn't more or less, it's sort of something I wanted to push
Yeah.
into this, and I think it could come in the literacy work. I think it could come in the standards process work, which is this idea that I think we're all very supportive of this idea that once you do decoding, if you really want students to have good reading comprehension, they need to know knowledge. It's a lot about background knowledge, and there's
Yes.
more and more about that. And so if we believe that, one way to make that really happen is to really be clear that part of what we're trying to build into these standards, especially at the elementary level, but also all the way through, is that knowledge building that builds on itself. And so it can be somehow we need to push that, I think, into the literacy standards work. Alistair, how to make that part of it, how to make it part of the high quality standards, how to make it part of the discussion, et cetera. And then on the standards review side, how to make it part of what we're reviewing for.
I think, and this is where the execution piece also has a big role. And so I will say, leading up to putting our vision and recommendations and my literacy work this last year, I've at this point talked to over 100 reading instructors in the city for their feedback. And there's a few folks who are reading coaches, even, who are very resistant to a sweeping policy that focuses entirely around science of reading and structured literacy. And the pushback that they have is not that this is not effective, but that it is not the only thing it's not exactly what every student needs. And so we shouldn't be just doing this like sweeping change without being really thoughtful about who needs what intervention when, right? So DIBELS is one of those assessments, right, that tells us who needs more phonics training. I'm just really simplifying it here, right? But as one example, if you score really highly in that, you might not need that decoding training in the same way that someone who doesn't, right? And so having that reading instructor only then focus entirely on decoding is not going to be super helpful for that particular student, right? And so throughout this process, and what I need to sort out is I think Representative Wattenberg, that what you're proposing is not necessarily a new work item, but something to weave into everything that we're doing, right? Which is be really thoughtful about when we recommend something, how does it intertwine with other standards? And then also, how does it actually play out in terms of how it's implemented and executed, so that it's not, so that it's, again, just like actually helpful for our students, rather than kind of swing the pendulum to the other side in a way that doesn't that doesn't actually solve the problem for everyone. Am I hearing you right?
Well, I mean, you're raising a different, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think that you're raising a specific set of issues around decoding. And I'll just say that what you're proposing could make sense. I will say it's very different from what is generally proposed. So if you're going to have these kids who aren't going to be doing the decoding, let's say, so are they off in a special intervention enrichment group? In other words, it changes what tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 is. So
Yep.
I think there needs to be some clarity on that.
Yeah.
But I
absolutely.
don't disagree with what you're saying on that. But it's sort of like, and we had a little bit of this discussion, is kids need 2 things to learn to be really good readers. One is the decoding, which we're putting a lot of attention on, and rightly so. And the second thing is building knowledge. And so part of it is that as part of professional development, I think teachers should know that. The point here is not that in order to do structured literacy, that therefore you do, the only thing you ever do in reading is decoding. You also need to be very deliberately building up knowledge. It means that when you look at a reading curriculum or reading standards or reading whatever, reading professional development, you're thinking about how are you building the knowledge. So
Yep.
it's a lens, I guess, on everything. And it's something we want to push into the plan, I think.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. Are there any other pieces here? Do we think this is something that we can take on and actually complete this year? Is it too much? Is it too little?
I think it's an aggressive structure, but I don't think we have an answer to the question until we started doing it. I don't think we should limit ourselves to, because this is a broad, I mean, if everything gets done, and like you said, we can have a whole committee meeting patting ourselves on the back. But it's needed. All of it is really needed. So why not? Nothing helps but a try.
Awesome. Great. And I think, what I would love to take these meetings to do moving forward is check in on where we are, recalibrate, and
Yep.
have commitments also from each of us who are members of this committee to say, okay, each of us, delegate tasks among us so that we can keep on track, right? And that might mean, actually, we say to President Sutter, we really need you and Vice President Thompson to bring this up at the next meeting with OSSI. It might mean we do another panel somewhere here. It might mean, Representative O'Leary, you talk to some more colleagues of yours to get feedback on a particular question so that can inform our next step, right? But I really, I get really excited about what we've laid out here as our plan, and want to be taking these meetings to then move things forward and adjust accordingly.
Yeah, I think it's
So,
well worth the struggle.
right. All right. So then, Representative Wattenberg, you still have your hand raised. Is
Oh,
that
no, I'm sorry,
Okay.
that's from before.
great? So the next point then, that there's two more things I want to cover, and so want to make sure that we can get through. One is around budget requests. Does anyone have? Let me start actually with social studies. Jessica and Alex, do you see anything in this work plan that would require funding from the board?
I suspect that we'll need some outreach efforts in
Okay.
once the public comment period is open, whether we want to do any more outreach besides our public meeting, if we want to go out into communities and do that. I think that staff is already talking about some sort of a late spring public engagement before as part of this work. So I think that's the one thing from social studies that might have budgetary implications.
Yep.
Alex, I don't have any sense of numbers on that, and I wouldn't want to speculate at this point because I don't know where some of the other committees are in their conversations around that engagement.
Sure.
But that's the only piece.
Okay. And I actually think that's the only piece around the literacy work too. I mean, there may be a need to hire a researcher to help move one or two pieces of the literacy work forward. We're not, there's still some open-ended questions, right? But I think what is certain is that we will need, I would like to make a proposal that this committee also requests an outreach budget for the literacy work to make sure that we're getting feedback from folks. And I think that's, when you say that, actually, President Sutter, do you mean, this is a question about how we've done this in the past. Is it for events? Is it for a survey, right? A researcher to do surveys? Is it for, food for the student advisory committee so that more students show up, right? I mean, how do you think about, yeah.
Yeah, so I know there's regulations around food, so I won't touch food.
All right.
We can figure that out. If we need to feed students, I'm always out for figuring out how we pay to feed students.
Okay.
But when I think about social studies, I think about it more as in the community events. So I think about it something like our fall engagement series happening this spring. So that's what's on my mind when I think about it. But I think, to your point, it feels like paying for some sort of a survey or a researcher might be the most appropriate engagement piece for the literacy.
Great. And can we just throw some numbers out, and just so you have some kind of anchor for the leadership meetings as we think about how different committees are funded for this work. So when I'm just thinking out loud here with you all, but when I think about an event, right, it's the room booking. If we do it at the DC SBOE office, I think that's, we don't need to pay for it necessarily, but that's also less accessible for folks, right? So I think of a room booking fee. I think of a marketing materials and letting people know about the in-person engagement that's upcoming. And I do think about, I don't know what the rules are for refreshments, at least. Maybe it's not food, right? But to make sure that we're at least keeping folks hydrated if they come out to give us their feedback. I think those are the costs that come to mind for me for an in-person engagement event. Is anything else? Yeah.
I've got it. You've piqued my interest a little bit. There's no place that we wouldn't want to have a literacy event other than the Martin Luther King Library. And
I disagree, but yes, I would love to do one there. And
we should,
our branch libraries also are very important.
We should partner with the Martin Luther King Library since they have funds too, but I can talk to people about donations as far as that's concerned.
Great.
But I think that would be, there would be no place other than the Martin Luther King Library to have an event. And they have a lot of rooms and a lot of room to have an event. And if we partner with them, just like even if you go by the library, because I go by the library every Saturday to go to the cemetery, and they always have this, they have a whole block long thing about reading on the wall, on the windows. I mean, we could get all kinds of, I'd like to volunteer to be part of that committee to do that.
So let's say then we don't have any venue costs because we use public libraries or we use our office, right? And so what costs do you foresee us needing for those in-person events then?
I don't think you'd have to have a cost necessarily. I don't know. I don't know anything about that. But also, let me just throw another thing. When you talk about,
are you going to make our marketing flyers, Representative O'Leary?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm thinking about the research people, you know more maybe than I do, I'm sure. OSSI must have literacy researchers. There must be somebody at OSSI that's working on literacy research. I think we need to ask OSSI to partner with us to as far as the research is concerned. I don't think we want to lean on our staff. Our staff does an unbelievable job as far as research is concerned, but OSSI must have somebody getting big bucks that's just concentrating on researching. There must be somebody there. I'm not even going to say DCPS, but I'm sure OSSI must.
Representative O'Leary, I think part of my budget ask to the leadership from this committee will be focusing around this piece of the literacy work is they have a literacy research team, right? And I think for us we can add value and also shape the conversation by bringing in someone to answer a question that we want to shape the OSSI conversation to move towards, right?
Okay.
And that's how I think about that as being added value that goes alongside and supplements what they're already doing, right? So to me, that's the that would be the ask. And I think, this is really helpful in the chat. I just want to flag, it would be really helpful from you, Alex, if we could see how much the fall engagement cost and also where we could, what was worth spending money on and what wasn't there. And then also past kind of hiring a contractor or a separate researcher to come in to help us with a separate task for engagement like this, or how much have we paid in the past? And then I think what I would love to say actually is that each of these buckets, social studies, literacy, and then leave your work in revising the process, each get an event and maybe a research fee if you need it. But I'm not sure if social studies needs the research fee anymore. I don't think so, right? I think it's more literacy might, and the revision of standards might.
I'm not trying to be cheap or anything, but since if you're talking about a researcher, are you talking about someone coming in and talking to us and answering questions? You're not. You're talking about someone doing the research and then providing a report.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Because I was hearing when you were talking about answering questions, because since we can do Zoom and stuff like that, we don't have to pay somebody to fly to DC from California who's the world's greatest expert on whatever. We can just talk to them like we're talking to each other. But you're talking about a report.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Leave.
Yeah, I had a quick question. This is kind of separate, but I wanted to make sure I said it out loud because I think I would have trouble communicating it via text. I was wondering if, and I think this is a question for Mr. Ju, if I could be sent a list of the different buckets of standards that there are. There's social study standards, or even if not what the standards are, just the amount of them. It's just because that's easier for me to think about.
Yes, I can make sure that you get that information then.
Awesome. Thank you.
Did you send that to all of us?
Yes, and I will say, I think in Alistair's agenda, I do think there's a table at the bottom of it that we've pasted over from when President Sutter was chair, that lists all of the standards that are in the district, and I believe they're all
Oh, cool.
linked. But if you printed it out, obviously you're not going to be able to click on those links, but in its virtual format, they should be there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I communicated what I was
No, that's fine.
asking. Not just like the standards, but like the specific courses. I know we have social study standards, we have language standards, we have math standards. Would it be
Yep.
possible, because I want to make sure that when I'm thinking about this, before we meet, that I'm not thinking like, there's 10 standards, 10 groups of standards when there's 50 groups of standards. Like,
So-
yeah.
I think these are all the right questions, Leave, and my proposal would be, Alex, if the two of you could meet and with our policy fellow and provide Leave a rundown of everything that's been studied and that we know to date, and just make sure that knowledge gets passed over. That would be super.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yep.
Okay, I've got something, one more thing I want to run by you all, and this one's less of the, hey, this is a statutory power or normal thing that the committee would do within the roles and responsibilities of the board. And so I want your feedback on if and how we might take this on. I think of two buckets of reasons to do it. One is because I think it fits in to inform our conversation around standards. And two, I think there is, I think, a big role in how we can engage the broader public around our standards work. So I've been reading a lot about how other states, right, are banning books and in their curriculum. And I wanted to propose that this committee take on some of the work that could inform, well, I think of a few different options for how we can take that and move forward. So one is, you know, I've been seeing a lot of banned book clubs where folks are coming together, reading some of the books that are banned, and actually having a discussion about why that state might have banned the book, right? What is it about this book that folks in a different jurisdiction find so threatening, and use that as a learning experience, right? To think through, what does that mean for DC? What does that mean for our students, right? And what does that mean for our education system and our standards and our educators? And I think of that as something that, you know, we as a committee might be able to take on, right? And at least push out. I think of a ceremonial resolution that this committee could put forward to for the other members of our board that really looks at, you know, what is our board stance in the conversation that's happening nationally around banning books and free speech. And I also think of, my mind goes in a whole ton of other directions there. And I realize that this question is not a particularly well-phrased one, but I'd love your feedback on sort of what we can do to make sure that we're not, you know, what's happening nationally as our nation's capital. Certainly, I mean, I don't see us falling into this anytime soon, right? As President Sutter, you said, you know, I don't see pushback in our social studies standards locally, right? But we are, as the nation's capital, I think, should participate in some of these national conversations and should take a stance. And I do think it's part of this committee's work. It could fall under this committee's work to do more than just put out a resolution.
I'll just chime in that Vice President Thompson, in her day job life, has some colleagues doing some work on this,
Okay.
and is planning to bring that to conversations. I don't know whether she'll bring it to the working session or whether it's something she'll want to share with this committee. But it came up in conversation with the DME, specifically around this question of how are we preparing for our release of our draft standards and pushback. You know, one of the things about being the District of Columbia is that members of Congress always like to try to take action on anything we do locally. So how are we preparing for that kind of thing? And Ebony Rose mentioned that as part of that conversation. So I will follow up with her to see if there's a way to make sure that this committee is made aware of that as soon as possible.
Great.
Because it sounds like there are some opportunities to get involved in a national conversation about that. I think there are a couple of other local nonprofits that are focusing on that and may provide opportunities for us to, you know, whether it's signing on to a joint letter or some other work to make ourselves visibly part of this conversation in defense of an honest accounting of history, a willingness to tackle all of our American history and not just pieces or slices of it, and a willingness to have honest conversations about all of the people who make up our country.
That would be super, and I see raised hands. So, but let me just close out with you, President Sutter, on this. I think when you talk to Vice President Thompson, I think one of the things that I'd love to consider is broadening the engagement with our constituents around this conversation. And I think for very, I mean, you all know, for very personal reasons, I think a lot about the way that the Germans have dealt with their past and their history, right? Of not necessarily taking down a statue, right? But rather around the statue, putting a lot of context, right? So that the statue then becomes a learning experience to not repeat a mistake of the past rather than as a something that's made invisible, and they don't, have that many statues as Representative Wagner. But
Yeah. The recent recall vote in San Francisco of school board members, actually some of the news coverage on this has an interesting piece about a mural in a high school that was, there was pushback against the mural because of the portrayal of paternalism and white supremacy in the mural. But the history of the mural was more complicated than that. And it was painted under the WPA with a sort of pushback against knowledge of our founding fathers at the time. And there was real debate over how best to handle this mural, whether it was to paint over it or to put context around it. So I think that there are a lot of opportunities right now to have conversations like that about how we push conversations forward rather than covering up or simply eliminating the past.
Yes, Lee, Fraser, Ruth.
The only thing that I was gonna say, and this isn't specific to something that we should do, it's just that in whatever we do, I think that the wording, like if it's a ceremonial resolution, the wording should be very clear that it's not just for like older students, because banned books aren't just in high school and middle school. I think that, it should be very clear that this is for all students, because I think that's the best way to receive good engagement, but also to make sure that like literally everyone's voice is being heard. Yeah.
Fraser.
I agree. I think that we want to make sure that the resolution covers all bases. All right, we don't have to, it doesn't have to be like a cheap shot kind of a resolution where there are obvious things that, because the thing is that the only way that anybody ever learns from reading is by reading. And the less books that are allowed to be read, the less anyone knows. So we need to make sure that the scope of a resolution, which is very clear about how important books are, has to be universal, and it can cover more than just critical race theory or genderism or something like that. It needs to be that students should be allowed to read at their levels about anything.
Yes. Ruth.
I was trying to find it. There was a tweet I saw today, and I'm now sorry I didn't retweet it so I could get it, but it was somebody, sort of a former teacher, I think, who basically said, I don't worry about, and I'm not saying we should take this first sentence, I don't worry about book banning because I just tell all the kids, if it's banned, you go out and you read it, because whatever's in there, that's what you need to know.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a great, there's a great energy about it. I don't know if he's involved in other stuff, but it did seem like it was sort of one of these banned book reading groups. And
I think I saw something by Mark Twain that said that.
yeah, maybe he was plagiarizing. I don't know.
And so, I mean, I put this in the chat, but I want to end on this proposal for President Sutter and to bring back to VP Thompson, which is, in the same way that we did outdoor story time across the city last year, I'm wondering if instead this year, for example, led by this committee, but bringing in the other board members, we could ask each board member to choose one book that's been banned by another state and do a local ward-wide book talk or conversation and discussion around that particular book that would resonate with their ward, right? And just time it all to be in a month that we decide. And so it's not necessarily happening all at the same time, but just, taking this as an opportunity actually to learn and grow and raise the issue, right? And the importance of engaging more folks around the issue rather than as a, it doesn't affect us. It's not likely going to affect us. And so therefore we don't get too involved. But
You're not supposed to say that, Alistair. I'm the one that's supposed to say the us, because I'm old enough to be everybody's father almost. And so there are millions of people in this country that say, well, I'm not concerned because I'm going to be dead before the earth burns up or whatever. But it's got to be universal.
I'd love your initial feedback on that, and then we'll wrap up. Is that something that you think would work for Ward 4 and Ward 3?
Yeah,
The banned book discussion?
Yep.
all my English classes were banned book discussions. Every book was banned by somebody.
What about you, Ruth?
It wouldn't not work. I mean, in turn, we have a very, we have a very busy schedule at our ward this spring. But, so that's my only concern, but yeah, no, I think
Got it. Yep.
it's a good idea.
Great. Okay.
I'm sure we can
So,
figure it out.
that'll be something that we've put a lot on you, President Sutter, to discuss with VP Thompson before our next meeting. But yeah, thank you so much. This was, I found this really helpful in terms of moving our, getting on the same page and moving our work forward. So look forward to our next meeting, which, Alex, I think we already have the calendar invitation for, but if you could move it to be 5 to 6 instead of 4:30 to 6, that would be great. And I look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday for our working session at the latest.
It's
Great.
for good
Thank
meeting.
you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm sorry didn't know what y'all had done before, except for that was great.
Great.